Okay, let's unpack this. Today we are focusing on a compact stomp box from back in 2010 that, well, it promised the massive roar of a full amplifier stack. We're talking about the BA SS ST2 power stack. And look, this pedal wasn't just another distortion box. It was billed as an amp voice distortion and preamp, specifically designed to give you the sound, and this is critical, the feel of a cranked British half stack. From that sweet vintage breakup all the way up to sharp modern high gain.
And that feel is everything. I mean, when the ST2 came out, the whole game was changing. Guitarists needed those real amp dynamics, the way a stack kind of compresses and reacts, but at lower volumes or, when you're running direct.
Right.
So the core promise here wasn't just saturation. It was realistic cabinet resonance behavior and that genuine touch responsiveness that you usually only get from really pushing tubes way past their limit.
So today, we're really dissecting how this little standard BA SS enclosure manages to simulate the complexity of a massive multi-component tube amp rig. Because, a traditional distortion pedal circuit is pretty straightforward, but modeling an entire stack, that means simulating physical behaviors, the power supply sag, the speaker cone movement, everything.
And historically, the ST2 it's absolutely fascinating because it really signals a turning point for BA SS.
Oh, so?
Well, before this, their amp-in-a-box concepts were often tied to specific collaborations or maybe more generic digital modeling. The ST2 was one of their first fully conceptualized attempts to build a proprietary, highly dynamic gain engine.
So it was their own thing.
Completely. And it was aimed squarely at the complex character of British amplification. So our mission today is to really understand the technological ambition, what they built, and how those four knobs can give you such a wide yet really curated matrix of tones.
All right, let's get straight into the engine room then, because this is where the ST2 really separates itself from its older, simpler siblings. When we think distortion, we think clipping the waveform. Simple.
Right.
But that doesn't capture cabinet resonance or power amp compression. So what specific elements of a full stack does this pedal model beyond just simple signal clipping? This feels like the core aha moment.
It is. What's so fascinating here is that the ST2 addresses the entire amplification system, not just, say, the preamp gain stage. The modeling is deeply comprehensive.
Okay.
It simulates four interconnected elements at the same time. First, you've got the cascading gain stages of the amp itself. Second, the power amp saturation, that crucial compression and sag that happens right before the signal even hits the speakers.
That's the feel part.
That's the feel part. Third, the specific frequency response and, the resonance of a 4x12 British-style cabinet. And finally, the way the dynamic response changes is the perceived virtual stack volume increases.
So it's not just distortion. It's the whole system acting up under pressure. How on earth did they achieve that complexity in a small yellow box?
Precisely. This comprehensive architecture is built on what BISS calls the S-Stack modeling engine. Superstack.
F-Stack, okay.
And here's the technical breakthrough. It's a hybrid approach. The pedal uses multi-stage analog clipping sections to handle the initial warmth and, the organic gain texture that tubes are known for. That analog grit is essential.
Right.
But this is then combined with digital pre-filter and resonance modeling. And that is where the magic of the speaker cabinet comes in.
Okay, so that's the critical point. The analog stage gives you the grit, the nonlinearity that tubes offer, which prevents that sort of fizzy, sterile sound we associate with older, purely digital distortions.
Exactly, you get the warmth.
But the digital side stops it from sounding thin, which is the classic amp-in-a-box problem, by simulating that heavy low-end push and the acoustic properties of a big 4x12 cabinet.
Yes. The digital resonance simulation lets the pedal produce that perceived thump and mid-range focus of a loud amp, even at bedroom volumes.
I see.
If the pedal were purely analog, simulating that heavy low-end behavior would need much more elaborate, expensive circuitry, or it would just sound flat when you run it direct. The hybrid S-Stack engine is it's efficient. It blends the best of both worlds to create a really expressive, loud-sounding pedal.
That insight into the hybrid engine is excellent.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to the face of the pedal, which is, where you interact with all that complexity. You look at the four knobs level, bass, treble, and sound, and they seem straightforward. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the controls do so much more than their labels suggest. Let's start with the one that most players, I think, often misunderstand. Level.
The level knob is perhaps the stealthiest, most important dynamic control on there. Of course, it controls output volume. You need it to match your amp or hit the input harder.
Standard stuff.
Standard stuff. However, Internally, turning up the level simultaneously increases the modeled stack power.
Okay, what does increasing stack power actually mean audibly? What does that feel like?
It means it introduces dynamic gain scaling. It models power amp compression and that sag we talked about. When a real 2 power amp gets pushed, it doesn't just get louder. The signal gets subtly squished and compressed, and it responds differently to your pick attack. The ST2 models this. As the level goes up, the pedal introduces this compression, subtly changing the feel of the distortion. It gets tighter, thicker, more responsive, instead of just being louder.
So you're not just dialing in output volume, you're dialing in virtual headroom destruction on the power amp stage. That's a huge distinction.
It truly is. But the real matrix control, the heart of this whole tonal universe, is the sound knob.
Yep.
If level dictates how hard the virtual amp is running, the sound knob dictates the fundamental voice, the gain structure, and the character of that virtual amp. As you sweep this control, you are literally morphing between 4 distinct characters.
All right, walk us through the sweep. What are the key sonic differences as you turn it clockwise?
Okay, so starting in the lower left region, we have crunch. This is the vintage, open, low gain setting. It's very dynamic with a bright, almost plexi-esque upper mid-range bite. Low compression, very responsive to the volume knob on your guitar.
Classic rock territory.
Absolutely. Then you move it slightly past 9 o'clock and you enter drive. This is where the pedal starts to thicken up. It delivers a classic rock tone, enhancing the sustain while still keeping really good note clarity.
And as we move into the higher gain regions,
Between noon and about 3 o'clock, you hit high gain. This enhances the mid-range significantly, and it often produces that really vocal 80s hard rock tone.
like the LA studio tones.
Exactly like that. The compression increases, but it still feels musical and responsive. Finally, in that upper right quadrant, you land on the modern stack setting. This radically shifts the EQ curve. The distortion becomes thicker, tighter, and the low end is specifically tailored for punchy, modern palm muting.
Okay, now, here's my critical question. That one sound knob is simultaneously adjusting 4 separate things: the gain structure, the mid-contour, the compression, and the speaker resonance profile all at once.
It is.
Given the breadth of tone you can get, doesn't locking all of that into a single knob limit your ability to really fine-tune your EQ? Isn't it a little bit too much control locked behind one dial?
That's a great question, and it speaks directly to the philosophy of the pedal. The ST2 is not designed to be a super tweakable amp modeler like a Helix or a Kemper.
Okay.
It's designed to be a highly efficient stack simulator. BIOS basically pre-programmed those 4 tonal shifts, crunch, drive, high gain, modern, to be musically appropriate based on the gain level.
So it's foolproof.
It removes the risk of a user dialing in, say, a modern high gain amount, but pairing it with a thin, vintage-style EQ curve that just sounds awful. It's curated tone. It simplifies all those complex relationships for you.
That makes a lot of sense. It handles the heavy lifting of tone shaping, so you only have to worry about the bass and treble.
Exactly. And speaking of those, the bass control is key. Remember, because this simulates the cabinet, the bass knob isn't just a simple EQ adjustment. It's simulating the physical thump and low-end pressure of speakers moving air.
Oh.
Which is why you have to be careful not to push it too hard. It's very realistic in its ability to generate some pretty overwhelming low end. The treble control then acts as the amp-style high-frequency shaping, adding articulation and presence.
So tying it all together is the dynamic behavior. You mentioned earlier how level and sound interact. Can you give us a specific playing scenario where a player really feels the benefit of the ST2's dynamics?
Sure. Take the low sound setting, that vintage crunch. If you play softly, the pedal almost cleans up, just like a cranked non-master volume tube amp would.
Yeah.
Hit the strings hard and you get that sudden surge of harmonics and musical breakup. Now, if you keep that same sound setting but crank the level knob up to max, the pedal brings in more of that power amp compression. So when you hit it hard now, the sound doesn't just get louder and break up more, it also stays tighter. It holds the note longer and resists that sudden collapse you might get from, say, a simple transparent overdrive.
So it provides the sustain and girth of a 100-watt rig without shaking the walls.
That's the idea.
Let's shift gears then and look at the whole tonal spectrum it covers. We should connect this complex matrix to actual musical application. Let's categorize the tones for the listener.
Okay, let's define the 3 main environments. When you're operating in those low sound settings, below 9 o'clock, you are firmly in vintage crunch territory. Think foundational classic rock. We're talking about rolling back your guitar volume and suddenly having that perfect AC/DC highway to hell kind of breakup. It's bright, it's dynamic, and the lows are loose but still musical, never muddy.
Perfect for rhythm work and getting that signature British upper mid punch.
Then you dial it up into the middle range from about 9 to 2 o'clock. This is where the hot rod tones live. This is the sweet spot for 80s and 90s rock LA, hard rock, British heavy metal pioneers. The mid-range is highly enhanced, which gives it that vocal quality that's perfect for searing solos. Sustain is excellent, and the tone holds up really well under fast picking without collapsing.
Finally, when you crank that sound knob into the highest region, the tone just transforms to satisfy more aggressive players.
Oh, absolutely. The high sound settings activate the modern stack. This is thick, high compression distortion. The mid-range often gets a little bit scooped back relative to the upper mids to provide clarity, and the low end is dramatically tightened. It generates those really aggressive, punchy palm mutes that hard rock and early metal demand. It has a real focused aggression.
However, and this is important, we have to provide that crucial caveat again. While it covers modern high gain, its core DNA is still rooted in that cranked British amplifier sound.
That's the key distinction. The ST2 is explicitly not designed to be the highly scooped, ultra-saturated sound of modern metalcore.
Not a metal pedal.
Not that kind of metal pedal. If you are looking for that specific clinical modern death metal gain, you would need dedicated pedals, like the BOSS ML2 or the infamous MT2 Metal Zone. The ST2 always retains a certain woody, organic quality, even at max gain.
That clarifies the character immensely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift our focus to practical application. If I'm a gigging musician or a home recorder today, why would I grab an ST2 instead of a cheaper distortion pedal or, a full digital modeler?
I think the answer is versatility in difficult situations. First, it's perfect for transforming clean, solid-state amps like a Roland JC120 or a Fender solid-state into stack tones. It gives those amps a character they just don't have otherwise.
Right.
Second, because of that built-in cabinet resonance simulation, it is superb for direct recording into an audio interface.
So if I use this direct into a mixing board, the built-in cab sim saves me from having to use an external impulse response loader or a separate plugin.
Precisely. You get that essential cab behavior instantly, which makes it a great grab-and-go solution for tracking demos or for a live silent stage setup. Third, it functions really well as a dedicated preamp.
How so?
You can plug the ST2 directly into an amplifier's effects loop return, bypassing the amp's own preamp section entirely.
So the SE2 becomes your amp.
It becomes your amp. It defines your foundational stack tone. And this is invaluable when you're facing, unknown or low-quality backline amps on a gig.
That makes it an incredibly reliable foundation for touring players.
And finally, it excels as a gain staging foundation for a pedal board. It's an authoritative, defined sound that takes other boosts and fuzzes really well. It can sit right at the core of your tone.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, then the ST2's legacy is really foundational. It represents a key stepping stone in BOS's evolution.
Absolutely.
It was an early, commercially successful foray into these dynamic amp voice distortion pedals, and it really paved the way for later, highly celebrated offerings like the JB2 Angry Driver, the OD1X, and their Wazacraft pedals.
It was a successful testing ground for that hybrid modeling concept. It solved a real-world problem. Guitarists at the time urgently needed huge, saturated stack tones at manageable volumes without the hassle of micing up a cabinet.
Yeah.
And this was during a period right before full-feature digital modelers became standard stage fare. It was just the perfect solution for the mid-level player who needed portability and simplicity, but demanded that high-end tube amp feel.
So, over a decade later, why does it still have such a devoted following?
Its enduring appeal is, I think, threefold. Its ability to make any amp sound bigger and more authoritative, its sheer versatility across the entire rock spectrum, and most importantly, its simplicity.
Right.
Players don't want to menu dive or load IRs just to get a great high-gain sound. You turn 4 curated knobs and you are there. It's a testament to powerful, simplified design.
Okay, let's provide that balanced view. Let's summarize the main advantages and crucial considerations for the listener who might be thinking about adding one of these to their board. What are the key pros?
The pros are clear. A remarkable tonal range, from classic crunch to a modern stack. A very convincing amp-like feel because of the dynamic power amp modeling. The built-in cab and resonance simulation adds significant realism, especially for direct use. And it's just very easy to dial in thanks to the curated nature of that sound knob.
And what are the considerations or potential drawbacks a guitarist has to keep in mind?
First, as we established, it is not a pure metal pedal. If you want that surgical, ultra-scooped modern metal tone, you need to look elsewhere. Second, that powerful bass control, because it simulates physical air movement, can get overwhelmingly boomy if you push it too hard into an already dark or low-end heavy amp. You have to treat the bass knob with a lot of respect.
And what about the top end? Can it get harsh?
It can. The high treble settings can become piercing if you pair it with a particularly bright amp or certain single-coil pickups, so it requires careful management. Also, its dynamic amp-like behavior might feel a little unusual for players who are just used to fixed-gain distortion where the compression is always constant.
It's a different feel.
It's a different feel. It takes some getting used to the subtle changes when the level knob is moved. And finally, because it's an amp sim, it has a defined character. You are committing to a British stack flavor. It is not a neutral overdrive.
So what does this all mean?
The ST2 Power Stack, at the end of the day, remains a profoundly dynamic and expressive pedal that successfully captured the essence of a cranked British half stack in a compact format. It's a deceptively complex tool that provides an instant authoritative foundation for classic rock and hard rock tones, bridging that gap between cymbal distortion and full-featured amp modeling.
This pedal is just a perfect example of advanced technology serving simple operation. It uses that hybrid S-Stack engine, blending multi-stage analog clipping with digital resonance modeling to achieve dynamic realism, all tucked neatly behind those four simple knobs. So here's a final provocative thought for you to explore. Does the simplicity of the controls, given the extreme complexity of the S-Stack modeling happening underneath, make the ST2 the ideal bridge for players who want realistic amp tone and dynamics, but without the deep programming and, let's face it, the cognitive load of modern digital modelers? We'll let you chew on that one. Thanks for diving deep with us.